few years ago, I came across a book called Global Humility, which I read, and to be honest, I was slightly annoyed by, because it was a book that said everything I wanted to say about global mission. I'll put a link to my review and also to the book itself on the notes for this video. The author of that book, who I'd never met and we're meeting for the first time on Zoom, is Andy McCullough. Now, Andy has just written another book, which I couldn't have written, and it's outside of my experience, but I think it is absolutely excellent. It's one of the best things I've read for a long while. It's called The Bethlehem Story, and I'm going to ask Andy to tell us a little bit about it. So welcome, Andy. Thank you for giving up your time. I really appreciate it. Before we start to talk about the book, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Eddie, and hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Andy. I was born and I grew up in Cyprus on the Greek side, and then my wife Jess is from South Africa. We met in London and got married whilst we were part of a church plant in a really multicultural bit of West London, in kind of Southall and Hillingdon, that bit of West London. Mm-hmm. And we had 4 kids while we were there, and then we went and lived in Istanbul for a while. And so we were involved in various things in Istanbul. And then we've been back in the UK now for a few years, and we are in a little place called Reading in the UK, where we're based, and half my job is working for church here in Reading, Reading Family Church, and then the other half of my job is kind of out and about, involved in mission stuff, and mostly in kind of the Middle Eastern part of the world.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so you've written and just recently published this new book, The Bethlehem Story. Could you just give us a brief overview of what the book's about, where it goes?
Yeah, I guess that's what we're having this conversation for, isn't it? So the Bethlehem Story basically takes the place Bethlehem and traces it all the way through the Bible. And what you realize is that Jesus being born in Bethlehem at the climax of the Bible and of history, it's not incidental, it's not accidental, but actually God was always working a big story out through this place. And so a lot of the characters that pop up in the Bethlehem Story, like Rachel and Rahab, and Ruth and David.
Okay,
a lot of
you there. Rachel. Okay. How does Rachel? Well, who is Rachel, and how does she pop up in Bethlehem?
The first mention of Bethlehem in the Bible is in Genesis 35, and it says Jacob buried his beloved wife Rachel there just as she gave birth to Benjamin and then died in childbirth. And actually today, if you go to Bethlehem, Rachel's tomb is there, and it's still a kind of a place that women of all Middle Eastern faiths, so Jewish women, Muslim women, Christian women, have gone to for hundreds of years to pray kind of at the tomb of Rachel. So she's a big part of the story, right at the beginning of the Bible. Yeah, so the book basically traces these different characters that are all part of the genealogy of Jesus, and develops a bunch of themes that I think are in the Bible story, but sometimes get missed because we zoom in to like a particular bit rather than kind of zooming out and trying to view the whole sometimes.
So one of the things that I was just struck by the way this story flows, but I found myself wondering, how on earth did you come up with this? I've been reading the Bible for 45 years, and I'd never seen the themes that you pulled out. So what was it led you to see that and to get around to writing the book?
Yeah, I think some of what I've done for the last few years, this book was probably 4 or 5 years in the brewing.
Yeah.
And I've found that as I've been teaching around the place, and particularly I think in Middle Eastern contexts, being with groups of people telling stories, I've found that stories like Ruth and Rahab and David and Mary and Joseph have a lot of kind of common themes that Middle Eastern people notice and resonate with. Things around honor and shame, things around hospitality. And then you realize that a lot of those stories are all set in Bethlehem. Right. And so you go, actually, that's... so then I started talking to people from Bethlehem, interviewing Palestinian Christians, reading books written by Palestinian theologians, and just kind of really trying to get inside how do Middle Eastern people read some of these bits of the Bible. So I think that's part of the thing, Eddie, is the Bible's a Middle Eastern book. And so sometimes people from the Middle East, you know, when Middle Easterners read the Ruth story, they notice a whole load of stuff that we might not notice because we're not looking for them.
Yeah, that's something I really appreciated about your book, was the way that you did bring in Middle Eastern, but not just Middle Eastern, African and Asian scholars too, to add to the story. It's something I bang on about endlessly on my blog. But I'd really recommend people read the book, partly just for that. It's a way of exposing yourself to voices from outside of our context. You've also given me you've added to my reading list. I'm not sure I want to thank you for that, but a few more books I need to buy.
Yeah, there's always more to read, isn't there? But you're right. You try and do a really thorough bibliography so that people can, you know, think, oh, how can I explore this a bit more? And give people, and because like you, Eddie, wherever I go, I'm saying to English people, you must read books written by people that don't look like you. And people often go, yeah, okay, well, can you give us some names? Who do we read? So it's actually really important, isn't it? Trying to help people.
Oh, it is. And I should say that although there is an extensive bibliography and you've got endnotes at the end of each chapters, the book is not overly academic. People who listening to this and thinking, oh, it's full of references and things, it's beyond me. It isn't. You know, anyone who's a regular reader will get the best out of this, but what you've done is made it possible for people who want to dig deeper to dig deeper. So if talking about scholars and things puts you off, don't let it. That's not where the book is. That's not where the book is going. Okay, so one of the things that you do in the book is to draw a number of contrasts, and the first one is between the snake people, or between the snake and the seed. Could you just you know, that sounds a bit odd as I say it in that way. Could you just sort of unpack what that is?
The snake and the seed. Yeah, I think, is it Genesis? I don't want to get it wrong now. Is it Genesis 3:15, the proto-evangelium, where God says to the snake?
I've just said you're not too complex, and now you go speaking.
Sorry. sorry. So God makes this promise in Genesis 3, somewhere in Genesis 3, where he says that, you know, to the snake, oh, the seed of the woman will crush your head and you will bite his heel.
Yeah.
And that kind of word seed pops up loads of times all the way through the Bible. And really it's talking about this promised line. And eventually Jesus, who is eventually the seed of the woman, the offspring, the great grandson. And then all the way through the Bible, whenever you're following this word, the seed, so, you know, the promise is made to Abraham, your seed, and then to Isaac, and then to Jacob, there's always opposition.
Right.
And you see that the snake in his various manifestations is always trying to fight against the seed. And so essentially you have seed people and snake people who are always kind of in opposition to each other all the way through until you get to Jesus, who is the seed, who he crushes the head of the snake in his death and resurrection. But at the same time, the snake bites his heel because so it's a kind of self-sacrificial victory where he absorbs the poison from the snake on behalf of all of us. So I think all the way through the Bible, and even when you get to the book of Revelation, It's still talking about the
Yeah.
seed and the snake, who's grown into a dragon. And so all the way through the Bible, from Genesis all the way to Revelation, you can follow this kind of battle.
Yeah. And so this works out in various different ways through the book. And one of the contrasts is between what happens in Bethlehem, and we all know about Bethlehem. We may not know all the details, but Bethlehem's where Jesus was born. We've heard of it. But you contrast that with Gibeah, a town that I suspect most people, it won't ring bells immediately. They may get there. Could you just expand a little on where that contrast comes from and what's going on?
Yeah, so you've got this really, really difficult story in Judges 19. And for those that are going to flick to their Bible quickly, I think it's one of the hardest stories in the Bible.
Yeah, it's horrific.
And it's this story of the rape of this man's concubine. And when you read it, you think, why is that in the Bible? And again, so often in the West, we're used to kind of zooming in to try and understand a passage. Let's go deep, let's do exegesis. Whereas sometimes if you get stuck doing that, it's useful to zoom out and go, okay, well, where does this story fit in the big picture of things? And in this story, you have these two places. You have Bethlehem and you have Gibeah. And
I didn't even know how to pronounce it.
I don't know how to pronounce it. But what you realize is that right from the beginning, Jacob had two wives, Rachel and Leah, and those two, the children of those two wives hated each other, and they're always fighting against each other. So even the Joseph story, that's all the sons of one wife attacking the son of another wife. So there's this constant squabbling for position between the children of the two wives. And that comes all the way through, so that when you get the nation being split into two, it actually splits along that line between the sons of Rachel and the sons of Leah. And so Bethlehem is in Judah and Gibeah is in Benjamin, and they're next to each other. And so they are like the pressure point.
Oh, okay.
Those two territories are like the pressure point of all the tension, all the tribal tension between these two sides of the family. And so in the story in Judges 19, Bethlehem is painted as this warm, hospitable town, and then Gibeah is painted as this brutal town that is kind of anti-hospitable. And later, when you've got the two kings that emerge in the book of Samuel, David is from Bethlehem and Saul is from Gibeah. And so people that have been following the Bible so far, because in the Middle East, geography is a really important part of, which village are you from? Where did your ancestors come from? That's almost the first question people ask you, It might be similar in Africa in some of the contexts that you're familiar with, Eddie.
Yes, oh, very much so, yeah.
And so people that have been kind of noticing that in the Bible should get to when Saul is presented as coming from Gibeah, and they should go, no, we should be a king, not from Gibeah, not from the tribe of Benjamin. No, that's all wrong. We should have a king from Bethlehem. And so you get this kind of this working out of the geography as part of the story of the Bible. And readers in the Middle East, they notice these things. They really matter to people.
I found that whole thing fascinating. There was just so much that I just hadn't seen, and as I say, I've been reading the Bible regularly and teaching it for 45 years, and this was all new to me. It was absolutely fascinating. Something I found more surprising is there are times you contrast Bethlehem and Jerusalem. There's Jerusalem, Zion, the holy city, and Bethlehem, again, in my mind, it's a bit of a sideline. It's where Jesus was born, but I hadn't realized its significance. But you don't expect it to contrast with Jerusalem, but you did make that contrast. Could you just expand a little on that one?
Yeah, I think if you look at the David story, when David is kind of first anointed in 1 Samuel 16, 1 Samuel 17, when he first breaks onto the scene, he's associated with Bethlehem. He's a shepherd. He's this kind of overlooked little lad, very marginal, and God is with him.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to the end of the David story and he's become the king in Jerusalem, actually you start to see his story unravel. It's really difficult, but you have the David and Bathsheba moment, and then you have him making some really bad decisions, and then when it passes to his sons, the kingdom falls apart. And so there's something about the David story that makes you go, while he was marginal and without power, there was a humility to him. But when the spiritual track of his life finds its kind of power in Jerusalem, and you end up with, David being king, then the story begins to unravel. And I've often puzzled around that. And what you realize is Jesus says later, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets.
Yeah.
And himself, like David, is born in Bethlehem, but put to death in Jerusalem, in a sense, by Jerusalem, by those in spiritual power. And so there's something there about marginality, and then being in the center of power, and the compromises that sometimes makes. And so I think it's a really important part of the story of the Bible, actually.
Yeah, I'd not noticed this before, but it's hard to argue. Now, one of the things you do through the book, we've mentioned that you build on, you take insights from people from the Middle East and from other parts of the world too, but you also talk about the contemporary situation in Bethlehem as a sort of continuation of the story. Could you just sort of give a bit of background on that? Some of your own experiences, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think you start by going, if I'm going to try and write about Bethlehem, I'm not from there, and I don't want to make the mistakes of just kind of an outsider putting their own thoughts on a place. And so, like you would, Eddie, I thought I need to start traveling there and visiting and talking to people. And the more you dig into it, the more you realize there is a really lively Palestinian Christian scene in Bethlehem. So the foreword of the book is written by Jack Sarah, who's a friend, who's the president of Bethlehem Bible College.
Yeah.
And so you start meeting these guys and reading their stuff and going, their perspective is often ignored. It doesn't often get listened to. But that's the whole point, is these are people from Bethlehem that have something to say about God. Let's not miss it. Let's not ignore them. And so that ended up being a really enriching thing. Probably for a couple of years, I've read a lot of stuff by Palestinian Christians to capture some of that in the book. But hopefully it gives us a bit of a flavor for the life, the kind of the life that there is in this little place Bethlehem still today.
And I think it shows too that the Bible story isn't just something that happened a long time ago. We're still living in the story as it works out, and as Jesus is building his church around the world. I thought that sort of continuity was really helpful through the book. Now, obviously, my major interest is is World Mission, Global Mission. This book focuses on one small town to the south of Jerusalem. But what do you think are the implications of what you've experienced and what you've written, what you've read through the scriptures about Bethlehem for Global Mission?
Yeah, I think there's actually loads of little bits. So David Devenish very kindly wrote the kind of the afterword, which was taking a lot of stuff that's been discussed in the book and trying to lay it out as kind of practical things, which is an incredibly helpful chapter at the end. But to me, I think it's very much, if God became man, with, you know, the missio Dei, the mission of God, and said, the way I'm going to do this is actually in a little town in the middle of nowhere, in the margins of the world, in a very ordinary family. You know, he's not born in a palace in Jerusalem. He's born in a small village house in Bethlehem. And if Bethlehem was part of a country that was at the time colonized by the Romans, and so the whole birth of Jesus is kind of under empire and difficult. There's persecution from the moment he's born. Herod and his soldiers try and kill them. They have to be refugees and flee to Egypt. So if the whole mission of God is actually this vulnerable endeavor, and incarnation is this kind of disempowered marginal space, if that's what God did, then that's what our mission should look like. And so our mission needs to be not about going to the centers and going to the shiny, you know, I don't know about the kind of the world that you're in, Eddie, but in the world that I'm in, there is this narrative of kind of upstream influence, and you know, to change the world, you need to reach powerful people. I think that, well, that's not what we see in the Bethlehem story. So it's about the poor, it's about the marginalized, it's about a voice for the voiceless, it's about refugees. And so I think there's loads of things in this story that speak to our mission today.
I worked with a people group in Ivory Coast that even 20 miles down the road, people didn't know they existed. And people denied that they had a language when they did know they existed. And very much the marginalized, and you know, work with Bible translation is about that. And it's one of the things that really does motivate me. You know, we're looking for the groups that people have forgotten. Just a couple of questions to finish off with. A big one and a slightly less serious one, but let's do the big one first of all. On the basis, you know, of your experience, going back to working in Turkey, the work you do now across the Middle East, your reading and talking to people, if you had all of the leaders of British evangelicalism in a room and you had just a couple of minutes to speak to them, what would you want to say?
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
I can't organize it, but
I'm not sure I'd find the words, Eddie. I think I'd say God is doing something quite extraordinary. But it can so easily be missed because it's not big and shiny. And it's really in the margins of the world and amongst unreached peoples. Some of the most exciting stuff that God is doing today and that people are learning about God today never makes it into your books or onto your Christian TV channels. And the way to find it is to go and live amongst people that don't know Jesus and learn their language and listen to them. You will know the Bible better. You will know Jesus better. And it will enrich the church in the UK. The church in the UK desperately needs voices from people in other part of the world to speak to her. And so we must travel to listen, not just to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, we've got to learn other people's languages so that we can listen to them.
Preach it, bro.
And yeah, 100%. And so I think there's a whole thing that is happening. And the kind of the missional space amongst marginal, forgotten, unreached people like you're talking about, Eddie, is actually the R&D department of the global church. Is the place where the learning is.
Yeah.
And so the church in the UK, just like the church anywhere else, desperately needs to engage and needs to learn and needs to listen to the margins.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And thank you for writing these 2 excellent books. Very much appreciate them. And thanks for talking to me. But just before we go, just, we've heard some of your passion, heard some of your heart. On a lighter note, could you just share something about what you're reading at the moment and what music are you listening to, just so we get to know a bit about Andy McCullough beyond the books?
Yeah, sure. At the moment, I'm reading a great history of Christianity in Asia by Samuel Moffat. It's a 2-volume classic. I've actually wanted it for 10 years.
Right.
So it's taken me that long to get hold of it, but I wish I'd got hold of it earlier because it's brilliant. So reading that, really strongly recommend it actually for people that are interested in kind of Christianity in Asia. So I'm reading that at the moment, really enjoying it. And then in terms of music, my kids are teaching me loads about music at the moment. I've got a bunch of teenagers. and they've got great taste. So I mean, in the kind of Christian space, I don't know if you've come across Governor B.
No.
He's a kind of Christian R&B artist,
Okay.
East London, and he's won a couple of Mobo Awards.
Right.
I just love his music. It's it's contemporary, it's real, but it's very honest. And so I'm really enjoying his music at the moment.
Okay, I'll put a link to those too. Andy, thank you very much. It's been a real privilege to chat to you this morning and to learn from you. And again, thank you very much for the hard work you've put into writing these books. I hope the Lord will use them widely to build his church and to glorify his name.
Amen. Amen. Thanks, Eddie. Great to chat to you.
You're more than welcome.